Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis or like a prescription, there is this expectation of total precision.
Right, yeah.
It feels almost like engineering. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the screen and says, there it is.
Exactly. It feels binary. Clean, broken, or not broken.
Infected or not infected.
Yeah.
But then you look in your own medicine cabinet at something so incredibly common that you've probably taken it a dozen times, and you realize the story behind it is, well, it's anything but clean.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Today, we are looking at a medical miracle whose history involves messy desks, moldy cantaloupes, desperate urine recycling.
Oh, yeah, we'll get to that.
And a literal evolutionary arms race happening inside us right now.
We are looking at the original antibiotics, right? The penicillins. And the reason we are doing this is that understanding penicillin isn't just about reviewing this quirky moment in medical history. It is really the opening chapter to the antimicrobial resistance crisis we are facing globally today. Like, if you want to understand the superbugs of tomorrow, you have to understand the mold of the past.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive into our sources is to figure out how these original antibiotics actually explode bacteria from the inside out, trace their wild journey from a lab curiosity to a World War II industrial miracle, and finally uncover why that penicillin allergy sitting right there in your medical chart is, well, probably a lie.
It's a big mission.
It is. So we have to start with the myth versus the reality of how this all began. If you ask anyone on the street who discovered penicillin, they will say Alexander Fleming in 1928.
And, I mean, that is technically true, but it leaves out the most crucial part of the story.
Right.
Fleming's discovery was brilliant, but it was also incredibly incomplete.
Because the famous story goes that Fleming, a Scottish bacteriologist at St. Mary's Hospital, comes back from an August vacation, and he had carelessly left a petri dish of Staphylococcus bacteria completely uncovered on his very messy desk.
Which is just a nightmare for lab safety today.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And he finds it contaminated by this blue-green mold, and around that mold colony is this clear halo where the bacteria had just been annihilated.
Right. So he isolates it, identifies it as a Penicillium species, and names the active substance penicillin in a 1929 paper. He realized the mold was secreting something into the jelly that was toxic to the bacteria.
But looking at the sources, he actually failed to purify it. Like, whenever he tried to extract it and stabilize it, it just broke down.
Exactly. The chemistry of the substance was incredibly fragile.
So he basically viewed it as a neat laboratory curiosity. Maybe a topical antiseptic you could swab on a surface to clean lab equipment.
Yeah, he didn't see it as a systemic drug.
So if Fleming essentially just left this potential miracle cure sitting on a shelf for a decade, who actually gave us the medicine?
Well, the real heroes of the clinical drug are the Oxford team. We are talking about pathologist Howard Florey, biochemist Ernst Boris Chain, and their incredibly resourceful colleague Norman Heatley.
Okay.
This is 1938 to 1940. Britain is at war. They are facing the Blitz. Rationing is in full effect. They're desperately short on funding and equipment.
I can't even imagine trying to do high-level science then.
Right. But this team somehow manages to do what Fleming couldn't. They figure out how to extract and purify penicillin into a stable, injectable form. Heatley was even designing extraction equipment out of old milk churns and bedpans just to make it work.
Bedpans.
Bedpans.
Which brings a level of sheer desperation to the story that I just had no idea about.
Yeah.
And that desperation really peaks with the tragic case of Albert Alexander in 1941.
Yes.
He was an Oxford police constable who literally just scratched his face on a rose bush in his garden. That is all it took.
Which is terrifying. Before antibiotics, a simple scratch could absolutely be a death sentence. The bacteria found a way in, and he developed an overwhelming systemic staphylococcal and streptococcal infection.
Just from a rose bush.
Yeah. His face was massively swollen, he lost an eye, and he was actively dying. The human immune system was simply overwhelmed.
So the Oxford team decides to give him this newly purified experimental penicillin. And he improves dramatically in a matter of days. The fever drops, the swelling goes down.
It was arm-wrecking.
It was. But here's the specific detail that absolutely blew my mind in our sources. Their supply of the drug was so scarce, and the extraction process was so agonizingly slow, that they literally had to collect his urine.
Oh, this part is rough.
Recover the unmetabolized penicillin from it and re-inject it into him just to keep the treatment going.
It is a harrowing image. You have scientists desperately processing a dying man's urine to extract microscopic amounts of a drug.
It's like desperately squeezing the absolute last microscopic drop out of a toothpaste tube because your life literally depends on it, but the tube is empty.
Exactly. It highlights exactly how fragile the manufacturing was. They were growing the mold in hundreds of flat little laboratory vessels, yielding tiny drops of the active compound. And despite the urine recycling, the supply simply ran out.
Oh, no.
Yeah, Albert Alexander relapsed as the bacteria surged back and he tragically passed away.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But his case proved undeniably that penicillin had immense power to save lives, right?
Absolutely.
But it also proved that Britain, in the middle of wartime bombing raids, couldn't possibly manufacture it at the scale needed.
Right. They had to industrialize the cure. They had to take it from a boutique lab experiment to mass production. And that shift happened in the United States in 1941.
Okay, so how do they scale it?
Norman Heatley travels to the U.S. to work with the Department of Agriculture lab in Peoria, Illinois. They chose this lab because they were experts in fermentation.
Makes sense.
But the first thing they realize is that the strain of mold Fleming found in London just wasn't productive enough. So they start this massive global screen of molds from all over the world. They're even having the U.S. military send back soil samples.
Just hunting for a better mold.
Exactly, to find a strain that yields more penicillin.
And the winner didn't come from an exotic jungle or a battlefield. It came from a moldy cantaloupe found in a local Peoria fruit market.
Brought in by a lab assistant famously nicknamed Moldy Mary.
Moldy Mary.
Yeah. That specific cantaloupe happened to host a hyperproductive strain of penicillium. From there, pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Merck, and Squibb took over.
Right.
Because they realized that growing mold on the surface of flat trays was useless for mass production. So they developed deep tank fermentation methods, blowing sterilized air through massive multi-thousand-gallon vats of nutrient broth.
A broth made from a byproduct of corn processing, if I remember the sources right.
Exactly. They took it from fragile glass bedpans to massive industrial vats. And the timing was critical. By D-Day in June 1944, there was finally enough penicillin to treat wounded Allied soldiers.
And the impact on the war effort was just staggering. It vastly reduced deaths from infected battlefield wounds, amputations, gangrene. Soldiers who would have certainly died in World War I were surviving in World War II.
And that massive, unprecedented collaboration between government, academia, and private industry ultimately led to the 1945 Nobel Prize for Fleming, Florey, and Chain.
Okay, so we figured out how to mass produce this miracle mold juice.
Right.
But what was it actually doing inside the human body to save those soldiers? Like, how does it actually fight the infection?
To understand that, we need to look at the physics of bacteria from first principles. Think about the core problem a bacterial cell faces every single second of its life. The cytoplasm, the fluid inside the bacteria, is packed full of dissolved salts, proteins, and nutrients. Because that internal environment is so highly concentrated compared to the fluids in our bodies, water from the outside environment is constantly trying to rush into the bacterial cell to equalize the pressure.
Right, osmosis.
Exactly, osmosis.
So it's kind of like an overfilled water balloon hooked up to a hose that won't turn off. If you don't have something extremely rigid holding that balloon together, all that rushing water is just going to build up immense pressure and make it pop.
That is a perfect analogy. The internal pressure of some bacteria can be incredibly high. For the bacteria to survive that, they have a rigid corset holding the balloon together called the peptidoglycan cell wall.
Peptidoglycan, okay.
It's a dense, mesh-like exoskeleton built from long chains of sugars that are tightly cross-linked to each other by short peptide bridges. Without those peptide bridges linking the chains together, the mesh is completely useless. It just falls apart.
Yeah, this is where the drug comes in and wreaks havoc.
Yes. So the bacterial enzymes that build those crucial bridges are called transpeptidases. Or, in medical literature, you'll often see them called penicillin-binding proteins, or PBPs.
Okay, PBPs.
Now, penicillin's core chemical structure, specifically a part of it called the beta-lactam ring, structurally mimics the exact protein building block that the bacterial enzyme normally uses to build the wall. Specifically, it mimics the de-alanine part of the peptide chain.
Wait, so the drug is essentially a molecular Trojan horse.
Yes.
It dresses up to look exactly like the bacteria's own building materials.
Exactly. It's a brilliant deception. The technical term for this is suicide inhibition.
That sounds intense.
It is. The bacterial enzyme is floating around, it sees the penicillin molecule, thinks it's a normal building block, and tries to grab it to build the wall. But when it grabs the penicillin, the drug forms a chemical superglue bond with the enzyme's active site.
Oh, wow.
It is totally irreversible. The enzyme permanently disables itself just by trying to do its job.
That is brutal. So the enzymes are permanently jammed. They are glued shut. But how does that actually kill the cell? Because if the wall is already there, shouldn't the bacteria just survive with the wall it already built?
Well, that would be true if the bacteria were completely static. But bacteria are constantly trying to grow and divide. And to grow, the bacteria actually has its own autolytic enzymes. Think of them as a demolition crew.
Okay, a demolition crew.
This demolition crew is constantly cutting tiny holes in the existing mesh corset so the cell can expand and insert new material.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Under normal circumstances, the building enzymes immediately patch those holes with new crosslinks. But because penicillin has superglued all the building enzymes shut.
The demolition crew just keeps cutting.
Exactly. They keep cutting and nothing gets repaired. The wall just gets weaker and weaker, full of unrepaired holes.
The corset just shreds itself, and the balloon loses its support.
Yep.
The structural integrity fails. And because that immense osmotic water pressure is still relentlessly pushing from the inside, the bacteria literally rupture. They burst open.
The osmotic pop, and this makes a really important distinction that our sources highlight. This bursting mechanism is why penicillin is classified as bactericidal, right?
Yeah.
Meaning it actively murders the bacteria.
Right.
As opposed to just bacteriostatic, which are drugs that simply pause bacterial growth and wait for the immune system to clean up the mess.
Exactly. And it also perfectly explains a clinical quirk. Penicillin only works on actively growing, actively dividing bacteria.
Because if a bacterial cell is dormant, hiding out, and isn't trying to build new cell wall material, there's nothing for the drug to sabotage. The Trojan horse just floats by.
You nailed it.
That is fascinating. But here's the catch. Penicillin didn't work on all bacteria. I'm looking at our sources here, and there's a lot of discussion about the gram divide, splitting bacteria into gram-positive and gram-negative categories. What does that actually mean for the drug? Well, it all comes down to the bacteria's physical armor. When you look at gram-positive bacteria, like the streptococcus that causes strep throat, they have a very thick but completely exposed layer of that peptidoglycan corset on their outer surface.
So it's right there in the open.
Yeah, it's an easy target for natural penicillin G floating by.
But the other half of the bacterial world is different.
Very different. Gram-negative bacteria, like E. coli or Salmonella, have a much thinner layer of that mesh corset, and they hide it behind an entirely extra outer membrane.
Almost like a castle wall.
Right, like a castle wall. And that outer membrane is studded with these narrow, microscopic channels called porins. For any drug to reach the mesh and destroy it, it has to physically fit through those tiny porin doors.
And natural penicillin G, the stuff straight from the moldy cantaloupe, is just too big.
Yeah, it's too bulky to fit through those narrow doors. It just bounces off the gram-negative armor.
Which was a massive limitation. We had miracle drug, but it only worked on half of the pathogens out there.
Exactly. To fix this, chemists had to essentially hack the drug to bypass the armor. This leads us to a massive breakthrough in 1959 by British chemists at Beecham Research Laboratories.
I like to think of this as the molecular Lego revolution.
That's a great way to conceptualize it. These chemists managed to isolate the absolute core nucleus of the penicillin molecule. It's called 6-aminopenicillinic acid, or 6-APA.
Okay, 6-APA. So instead of relying on whatever random nutrients the mold happened to be eating in the industrial vat to dictate the final shape of the drug, we suddenly had the base Lego brick.
Right. You strip away all the variable parts, and you're left with just the active warhead, the beta-lactam ring that fools the enzymes. And once they had that base Lego brick, chemists could just snap on whatever chemical side chains they wanted in the laboratory.
That's incredible.
It completely split the definition of the drug. You now had natural penicillins made by fermentation and semi-synthetic penicillins engineered by humans.
So how did they solve the narrow door problem with the gram-negative bacteria?
By bolting on specific new chemical side chains to that 6-APA core, chemists created a new class called aminopenicillins, which includes drugs you've definitely heard of, like ampicillin and amoxicillin.
Oh, sure, amoxicillin. Everyone knows that one.
Right. These newly engineered molecules were physically smaller, less bulky, and more water-soluble, allowing them to slip right through those narrow porin channels of the gram-negative bacteria.
So we were effectively playing molecular Lego to build better, smarter, more versatile weapons.
What's fascinating here is just how quickly the bacteria fought back.
I mean, they always do.
They do. We tend to think of antibiotic resistance as a modern problem, but by the early 1950s, long before the Lego Revolution, the majority of hospital staff strains were already completely resistant to natural penicillin.
So they evolved a countermove to the Trojan horse.
Yeah. Many bacteria started producing a new defensive enzyme called beta-lactamase. Think of this enzyme as a pair of molecular scissors.
Okay, molecular scissors.
Instead of being fooled by the penicillin, this new enzyme patrols the perimeter, recognizes the beta-lactam ring of the antibiotic, and chemically chops it open before the drug can even reach the wall-building machinery.
It just cuts the Trojan horse in half.
The antibiotic is completely neutralized.
So the human countermove to those molecular scissors was a drug called methicillin, right? Invented around the same time in 1959.
Yes.
The chemists took our Lego brick and snapped on this massive, bulky chemical sidechain. This sidechain acted like a giant bouncer at a club door. It physically blocked the bacterial scissors from getting close enough to chop the ring.
But the bacteria didn't stop there. They are the ultimate survivalists. They made a counter move.
And this leads to a massive misconception that we really need to clear up. Because when people hear about MRSA in the news, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, they almost always assume the bacteria just mutated to destroy the methicillin faster. Like they think the molecular scissors just got sharper.
Right, but MRSA uses an entirely different evolutionary trick. Instead of destroying the drug, it altered the locks on its own doors. It evolved an entirely new wall-building enzyme, a mutated target called PBP2A.
PBP2A, okay.
And because the shape of the enzyme has changed, the methicillin molecule simply cannot bind to it.
The Trojan horse doesn't fit the gate anymore.
Exactly. The drug is totally useless, not because it's destroyed, but because it has nowhere to dock. The chemical superglue bond can't form.
But we didn't give up on the scissor problem either. We came up with combination drugs like Augmentin, which I know so many listeners have probably taken for like a stubborn sinus infection.
Very common, yeah.
Augmentin is actually two things mixed together. Amoxicillin paired with clavulanic acid.
And the pharmacology behind that pairing is brilliant. The clavulanic acid acts as a beta-lactamase inhibitor.
Which means?
In simpler terms, it acts as a sacrificial lamb.
Oh, wow.
Its whole job is to look incredibly tempting to the bacterial scissors. It happily lets the bacterial enzymes attack it and destroy it. This keeps the defensive enzymes completely occupied, allowing the actual antibiotic, the amoxicillin, to slip past unnoticed and destroy the cell wall.
We are literally throwing decoy molecules at them. That's incredible. But, you know, we were warned about all of this. Alexander Fleming himself gave a quiet, chilling, cautionary tale during his 1945 Nobel lecture.
He had striking foresight. He stood at the podium and warned the world that if you underdose penicillin or expose bacteria to insufficient quantities, you aren't going to cure the infection.
Right.
You will just kill off the weak, susceptible bacteria, leaving behind the strong ones that happen to have a natural resistance. Those survivors will then multiply, passing on their resistant traits.
It's just basic natural selection.
Exactly. He perfectly predicted the crisis of antimicrobial resistance before the public even knew what it was.
So we are actively losing ground to bacterial evolution. But what our sources argue is arguably worse is that we are also handicapping ourselves with incredibly bad data.
Yeah, this is a huge issue.
Which brings us to a major clinical controversy surrounding this drug. It isn't about the chemistry, it's about what is written in your personal medical chart. Here's where it gets really interesting for anyone listening.
It raises a massive question about patient safety and how we classify drug reactions in modern medicine.
Because, according to the data, over 10% of hospitalized patients in the United States carry a penicillin allergy label in their medical chart. 10%. That is millions of people.
It is.
But when these patients are actually given formal clinical skin tests by allergists, over 90% of them are not actually allergic.
Over 90%. It is a staggering mislabeling problem.
How does that even happen?
You have to look at the real-world mechanics of how these mistakes occur. A very common scenario is a toddler getting a viral illness that naturally causes a skin rash. By sheer coincidence, a well-meaning doctor prescribes an antibiotic like amoxicillin for them at the exact same time.
Right, I can see that.
The viral rash appears, the worried parents and the doctor blame the penicillin, and that child carries a red allergy label in their file for the next 60 years.
Or someone just has a mild, completely normal side effect, right?
Yeah.
Like The antibiotic upsets their stomach or gives them a headache, and the clinic records it as an allergy instead of an intolerance.
Exactly. Now, to be absolutely clear, true severe allergies do exist.
Of course.
An anaphylactic reaction to penicillin, where the immune system attacks the body, causing throat swelling and plummeting blood pressure, is very real, and it can be fatal in minutes. But it is incredibly rare.
So the true allergy is rare, but the mislabeling carries a huge hidden cost to the healthcare system and the patient.
A massive cost.
Let me push back on that for a second, just plain devil's advocate.
Sure.
If there's even a small risk that someone might stop breathing, why do doctors care if I just ask for a different antibiotic? I mean, we have dozens of different antibiotic classes now. Sorry, right? Why force the issue and try to prove I'm not allergic?
Because avoiding penicillin when you don't need to forces doctors to prescribe broad-spectrum alternatives like fluoroquinolones or vancomycin. You're bringing out a sledgehammer when you just needed a scalpel.
Okay.
And these alternative drugs are often less effective for your specific everyday infection. They are far more expensive. And crucially, they carry a much higher risk of causing severe collateral damage to your body, like wiping out your healthy gut bacteria, which can lead to C. diff colitis, a dangerous, sometimes fatal intestinal infection.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize the alternatives were that intense.
They can be. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of the arms race, constantly using these heavy-duty broad-spectrum drugs drives even worse bacterial resistance across the board. You are training the bacteria to resist our absolute last lines of defense unnecessarily.
So by avoiding the simple penicillin out of a false fear, you are actively making the global superbug problem worse.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense why hospital penicillin allergy delabeling programs are now a major modern patient safety initiative. Doctors are actively testing patients while they are in the hospital and formally removing these false labels from their charts to protect them in the long run.
Right. There's also a related nuance with cephalosporins, which are a different but chemically related class of antibiotics.
Oh, right, cephalosporins.
It used to be taught in medical schools that if a patient had a penicillin allergy, they had a 10% chance of dangerously cross-reacting to a cephalosporin.
But that's not true.
We now know that research was flawed. The cross-reactivity is actually about the specific chemical side chains attached to the drug, not the core ring itself. So the actual risk of cross-reaction is vastly lower than the old textbooks claimed.
So what does this all mean for us today? Let's wrap this up. There is a final misconception we have to dispel. Just because penicillin is cheap, old, and has been around since World War II does not mean it is obsolete or weak.
Not at all. It remains the absolute gold standard first-line therapy for several major infections. For instance, Streptococcus pyogenes, the specific bacteria that causes strep throat, has remained almost universally susceptible to plain old penicillin for over 80 years.
It hasn't figured out a way around it yet.
Nope. It is also still the definitive frontline treatment for syphilis. Cheap and old does not mean ineffective.
So if we connect all of this, penicillin isn't just a drug. It is the founding case study of the ongoing war against bacterial evolution. MRSA, drug-resistant gonorrhea, the terrifying superbugs circulating in our hospitals right now. They are all direct descendants of the evolutionary arms race that started the very moment Fleming's mold was scaled up in those massive vats in Peoria.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we forced the bacteria to adapt, and they did.
It is wild to think about. We spend billions of dollars globally trying to invent the next miracle drug to outsmart bacterial evolution.
Billions.
But thinking about where this arms race goes next, it makes you wonder, what if the most immediate medical breakthrough we can make right now isn't in a lab at all?
What do you mean?
What if it's just aggressively cleaning up the outdated allergy data in our own medical charts so we can actually use the miracle we already have?
That is a really compelling way to look at it.
It makes you look at that messy, imperfect, incredible history sitting right there in your medicine cabinet in a completely different way. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.